Your headphones match your book beautifully.
I know. I'm obsessed with purple, always have been.
We are so excited, Dr. Lucky, that you are here today. We're also a little, honestly, would say a little starstruck, and it feels a little surreal because we have been following you for a long time. And when Katie and I started this podcast 2 years ago, Katie, now we made a wish list of if we like, what would it mean if we made it? Like who would be coming on?
Aw,
And your name was
Your name was on it.
at the top of that list.
that's
And
so
and so
kind.
this really feels like a sort of surreal moment for us to get to talk to you today and celebrate your new book. So
Yes.
we just want to start off with a big thank you there.
That means so much to me. Thank you so much. That feels crazy to hear. I appreciate the support so much, and it's funny, like going home on the subway. Sometimes I run into people, and it's like a nice reminder that. The 1.5 minute, 3 minute videos that I make in the 20 minutes before I start work or the 20 minutes before I leave my office are reaching people and resonating.
They absolutely are. And we are super thankful for your work. So I will just do a quick intro and then we'll get right into it. So, welcome back to the Fried Eggs podcast. Today we are joined by Dr. Lucky Sekhon, a double board certified reproductive endocrinologist, infertility expert, best-selling author of The Lucky Egg, which just came out this winter. And now, can we add to that, podcast host with your new
Yes.
Call Your Doctor podcast, which launched. So
Yeah.
congratulations on
We
that as
have like
well.
five or six episodes out, but we have a new episode that comes out every week, and we do a true deep dive. It's like an hour long deep dive into all topics about women's health with my one of my best friends from residency training.
Yeah, I love that you guys do that together. And I listened to the endometriosis one, and I can't wait for you to do more of those. It's great. So we are super excited to have you here to talk about your new book, which really feels like a roadmap or a lifeline, really, for folks going through the fertility journey, even if you're just starting or you've been in the trenches of treatment. And we are also really excited to dig in to how we can leverage this book and your work to really handle kind of some of the challenges that we're up against with misinformation online, fertility hacks, how to know when things actually might work or not for you, and how to be a better advocate for yourself
Mhm.
as you're going through the process. Katie and I have both been through our own journeys, and we're still kind of on them. I'm still on them. Katie might be starting a new one soon. Um, and so we're just really grateful that you're here to talk through all of this. And I would love to start with you're in the business of building families and helping people make babies. But I also get the sense from your work, especially as it's transitioned into social media and this book, that advocacy and education are super paramount to you as well. And I'm curious if you could start off grounding us in what drew you to reproductive medicine, what makes this work meaningful to you, what drives you every day to do this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it was any one thing or moment that brought me to reproductive medicine. I think I naturally always gravitated towards a field that would involve taking care of people, connecting with people. And I found this field specifically very interesting when I became exposed to it, even before medical school. And it was honestly kind of by luck, no pun intended. Enrolled in this like research program at the Cleveland Clinic over one summer. And they kind of randomly assigned us to different departments unless you had a burning desire. And I was very open minded at the time. And I ended up working with a bunch of urologists and people that were focused on reproductive health. Um, and that's where I learned about, male infertility. And from that, I learned about IVF. And I was like, this is so cool. I had never heard of it before.
Mm.
And this is like when I'm in my, I want to say like early 20s. And I was like, wow, egg freezing? Like, I didn't even know that this was a thing. I just found it so empowering and interesting that this was a technology that was invented in the 70s and it was moving at breakneck speed. And, there's so many fields of medicine that have accomplished so much and come so far. But it just felt really striking to me that it was just so cutting edge and innovative and felt like sci-fi. And I just felt it was so empowering as a woman, especially a woman who was planning a career in medicine, to know that there are options for you to really take control of your fertility. And then as I got deeper into the medical field, I just kept gravitating back towards it because I felt like it was the perfect blend of really focusing on how to support people, not just physically from a physical health standpoint, but also there's such a mental health component. And I am naturally an empath. And so for me, like applying that part of my personality to my day job and seeing how that can help people through their darkest times and knowing that building resilience is so important to getting to your end goal. It just seemed like a natural fit for me. It was a really organic journey.
That's amazing. When did you start to get into this education space? I mean, it's probably a natural shift for you. You're educating patients every day in the office and the clinic. And how did using that empath strength, you started to bring
Mhm.
it to the masses, really?
Yeah, I mean, I was never someone that was that active on social media from a personal standpoint. I remember my co-fellows, like when I was in my subspecialty training to become a fertility doctor, were making fun of me that I didn't have Instagram. And the same thing happened with Facebook, by the way, when I was in college. I was always the last person to sign up for these things. And I would be like, I don't really care about this. Cause it just felt like it was like such an effort to overly curate your life and put it on display, and I just like wasn't something that was important to me, so I never really used it that much personally. What really kind of pushed me over the edge was in 2020, and I started dabbling a little bit even in 2019. So I would say earlier in my career, I think I started to grow frustrated with the misinformation and how I was seeing it have a direct negative impact on my patients. And frankly, just from a selfish standpoint, it was adding so much friction to the conversations I was having with patients because it was like you had to wade through all this misinformation before you could actually talk about what matters. And so I was like, starting to create a little bit of content because I was seeing that it was a thing that people were doing, but I really thought it was cringy. And then 2020 came along and I was like, oh my God, I was pregnant. I had gone through IVF to have my second. And now she's 5, obviously. And it was an isolating time because I was like 18 weeks pregnant in March when the whole city shut down. And I made this really difficult decision to be like, I am going to work from home. And then eventually, like a week later, we suspended all cycles. Everyone was like, this is just, a collective effort to stop the spread. It'll only take 2 weeks, they said.
Yeah.
And I was at home and I was just so isolated. And as a doctor, I was like, I'm not
Mm.
used to this. I'm used to being in the clinic helping patients. So what can I do? And I actually took over our practice's Instagram account. I started posting about
Cool.
like, what do we know about pregnancy and COVID? Because like some of my patients were pregnant and really worried and started
Yeah.
creating online webinars. And I realized how powerful that was. And then it became a whole thing about talking about the COVID vaccine because there was so much misinformation about it causing infertility. So it just like snowballed because I started seeing the direct impact. My patients would be like, I already know your thoughts on this because I saw your video. And I was like, oh, this is a really
Mm.
powerful megaphone. Now I can start to use it for all
Yeah.
misinformation, and it just kinda grew from there.
I'm curious how you channeled that into writing the book as well, because I think both Amy called it a roadmap. I view it as like an encyclopedia almost. Like I love
Mhm.
how comprehensive it is. And there really is information for anyone, no matter where you are at in your journey with trying to conceive.
Mhm.
And I'm curious how you approached writing the book in an age of misinformation when there is so much noise about fertility, and also just who the book is for. Who did you have in mind while writing it?
Well, it's all kind of very fluid going from the social media
Mhm.
thing because, that, you know, kind of scratched the itch that I had when I was like, okay, I need to be able to have a voice. I need to put the misinformation to rest and as an expert,
Mhm.
be vocal. And it felt like not enough. And it still feels like it's too fragmented and people never
Mm,
have the full picture. People will DM me and be like, do you have a video on this? And it's like there's no easy way for them to scroll my grid. There isn't an index. And so then I started thinking in like 2023, how do I create resources that are more all encompassing? And I really started building out my blog. I have a blog called The Lucky Egg, which I started in 2020, by the way. And so I recognized early on that longer form content was necessary to really capture the content with nuance and give people like a 360 view of everything. But it still didn't feel like enough. And I was like, I just want to write like the fertility Bible. And so that's what I set out to do.
mm,
And it wasn't
Mhm.
something that I actually was looking for. It was more subconscious. I kind of was like, maybe that'll be the next step. But like, I'm so busy with patients and all the things. So like, I will wait for the opportunity to come to me. I actually said that. I'm like, I'm not going to go looking for this and like finding a book
Mm.
agent. I'm just going to let the opportunity find me. And that's exactly what happened. My book agent is someone who was struggling with infertility and was using my content to get through that. And it's a long story, but we came together. And then even my publisher, my editor is someone who also was on her own fertility journey. And at one of
Wow.
our first meetings, she brought a notebook filled with notes that she had written from all of the lives I had done. So this was
wow.
an
Wow.
organic thing that came together with a team of IVF warrior women that are all very connected to the cause. And it just happened. It happened the way it was supposed to happen. And because of that perfect team that assembled, I was like, okay, now's the time. And I'm going to write this. When we sat down to talk about the scope, I was like, I want this to be for everybody. So this is literally a book
Mhm.
that should be considered essential reading, I believe, for everyone as they enter their 20s, because there is no health class 2.0. And I feel like we do need formalized education and guidance. We can't just be like flying by the seat of our pants and hoping we have a great OBGYN that takes the time to tell us everything, or that, we come across the
Mhm.
right people in our lives that give us timely information. This is a time sensitive issue. And I think people make a lot of decisions that are not always based on the correct information. And I don't want anyone to look back on their life and have regrets that if they had the right information, they would have made different decisions. So it's a book that kind of lays out everything you need to know about your body, how it works, your cycles, how to track your cycles. It's about what you should be thinking about preconception, because I think all too often in our world, not just fertility medicine, but all medicine, it's all reactionary. It's not
Mhm.
proactive. And even today, I had a patient who called me who was like, I froze eggs with you way back when. Now I'm married. I would just love to get some preconception testing and to understand what I need to know. And I was like, you can get some of that done with your OBGYN, but I'm happy. I'm going to walk through like what I think you should get tested. And she was like, no one has told me this. Like, no one has talked to me
Wow.
about genetic
Yep.
testing for me and my partner and all of that. So it's for preconception. It's for people that are navigating, okay, now I have been trying for a certain amount of time. I don't know when to seek help, where to seek help. How do you find a good clinic? What are the tests? What are the treatment options versus all the stuff that's online that, there's so many like add on things that aren't actually valid or necessary and there's noise. So, how do you drown that out? And then basically,
Mhm.
there's a more complicated section that's like, for troubleshooting, because that's where a lot of the
Yeah.
misinformation lives, because that's when people start to get desperate and they're willing to try anything. But there's also something very special. Two more things, I promise, and then I'll let you get to your
No,
next
no,
Keep
this
question.
is
going.
great.
Yeah, go ahead.
But there's two additional aspects that are extremely unique about this book. One is there is significant representation for the paths that often go untalked about,
Mhm.
like donor
Mhm.
egg IVF, using a surrogate. What are the mental health considerations for all of that? LGBTQ couples or individuals who are trying to navigate finding donor sperm, donor egg, or using surrogacy. And then also solo parents by choice. Like there isn't a
Mm,
lot out there on that. And so I created like decision trees to help people understand what their options are, because it can feel really overwhelming. And their situation is different than people with infertility, right? They haven't even had the chance to try. They need help from the get go. And then mental health. Mental health is woven throughout the book, but there's also a dedicated mental health section
Mhm.
because I think we don't talk about mental health enough. And I think the two pillars that we need to be focusing on if we want to change the game of fertility medicine is really boosting knowledge and filling that
Mhm.
misinformation or knowledge gap and supporting people's mental health and doing it in a more holistic way.
I want to plus one that. I mean, we've seen a lot of books, a lot of fertility related books, but I have actually not seen Asherman's
Yeah.
represented. And that I immediately went to that part of the book because that's what
Yeah.
I'm dealing
Because
with.
you have an
And
index.
yes, it was like, ah, there it is. And surrogacy, oh my gosh, there it is. And I just plus one, like going through my own journey trying to find what alternative pathways there are, that
Yeah.
was, like, so difficult, right? And I
Yeah.
remember when my very first infertility doctor suggested surrogacy to me, it was very early, and I
Mm.
was like, "What? What? What do you mean? Like, what do you mean?" Like, it was so shocking of a suggestion, and it took a while to get comfortable with it and, learn from other people's stories and talk to, frankly, more doctors, but I had never seen it as, like, an option before,
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
part of the game that's actually talked about, in, like, a normalized way, and
Mhm.
so, yeah, I love that you have it from start to finish, and I also really appreciated the stories, the, like, snippet of people's journeys throughout,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I was like, "I've been there, I know that story."
I just couldn't I didn't it was a huge challenge. I think that was the biggest challenge of the book was trying to understand what to include and what not to include. I wanted to include everything. Like by the time I was finished writing, I had like 150,000 words and they were like, "We're really
Wow.
aiming for
Mm.
less. Like it should be like 90,000."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh god." So it's like just over 100,000 words. But honestly, I didn't eliminate any of the information. I just found a way to write in a very lean way. So it could have been a lot longer, but I was just like, this information is vital. And I don't think it makes sense to fragment it and focus on just one area because you want to be able to meet the need. You want to be able to meet people wherever they're at. And also, to your point, like your journey started out looking one way and then it evolved. So I want to
Mhm.
be able to hold people's hand and guide them through whatever part of their journey they're in, right? And I think that this is like a more cohesive way to educate people and provide them with that continuity and support.
Mhm. Yeah.
Well, I
There you
wanna
go.
I wanna transition back to misinformation and to speak specifically to failed retrievals, failed transfers, loss, and how do you what do you recommend for those of us that are going through those experiences in the age of misinformation in terms of next steps? And how do you deal with that with your patients on like focusing what's inside their control and
Yeah.
what kind of protocols they can look towards when there is, like you said, you can go online anywhere and get a list of 10 different protocols that you could try for said issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious how you approach that when the treatments aren't working.
Yeah. I mean, my individual approach as a physician with my patients, because patients are going online and they're searching, is to have kind of like an open door policy. My patients have my
Mm.
email.
Mm,
They're able to approach me with their questions, and there is no such thing as a stupid question. And I
right.
invite them. I actively invite them to. I say, whatever if especially when things are difficult, I even invite them to go get a second opinion because even though I
Mhm.
might feel really firm in my belief of what the next best step is, I want them to feel confident about it too. And I feel like even if they go have a second opinion and that other expert says the exact same thing as me, or even if they say something that's kind of radically different, I try to make the patient feel so comfortable that they will very likely come back to me and discuss that opinion because then we can actually have, a discussion of the pros and the cons of whatever's being suggested and similarly, if they see something online, it's like I talk it through with them. And again, it comes down to two things: mental health support and education. And I think just simply shutting something down as like, that's not true, that's not, valid, that is misinformation, that is not going to resonate with your patient. They need to understand why. And I think that is really the major concept of how I handle patient care and communication with patients is really like teaching them the nitty gritty from the start. And that's how I approach the book. You have to start with the basics and truly
Mhm.
understand. And while I say you can skip from one section to the next, I think you get the most out of it if you read the whole thing because most people think they know the basics and
Mhm.
what they need to know, but 100% of the time, there's always some new fact that comes out. And you might think, "Oh, well, it's trivial. Like, why does it matter to know that you ovulate and you don't ovulate in an alternating fashion?" Well, because if you find out that one tube is blocked, you're not going to freak out and think, "Oh my God, it's now a 50% reduction in my chances," right? You're going to understand
Mhm.
that there might be like 4 months in a row that you ovulate on the side that you have a tube. So that's just one really specific example, but another one is like people sometimes avoid doing things that maybe could benefit them, like egg freezing or moving on
Mhm.
to IVF as the next step if that's what they need, because they've seen online that, oh my God, it's depleting all your eggs. You're going to go into menopause early. But if you actually understand that an egg retrieval is only getting to the eggs that happen to be available in that moment, and you're not able to go into, the storage unit of the ovaries and access all of the eggs that
Mhm.
you have for future cycles, you're not going to be concerned about that. So it's really about kind of filling that knowledge gap and working from the ground
Mm.
up so people have a strong foundation and they can
Mhm.
understand things in a more sophisticated way and we can have an elevated conversation. They're going to get more
Mhm.
out of every conversation they have with their doctor.
And that really was also something we clocked, just helping arm you for the kinds of questions to ask too,
Mhm.
Hmm.
like
Yes.
to ask your doctor and dig into more. I'm curious, are those some of the most common misconceptions people come to you with, or what are some of
Mm.
the common ones that you're just like, "Nah, that doesn't make sense," or "Let's talk about it," or we need major education here."
Yeah, I think another big one is obviously AMH, right? Their
Mhm.
Mm.
follicle count or their egg count. A lot of times people request to get this done because, it sounds like a good idea. And I'm not a proponent of burying your head in the sand. I actually think why not get that information? But the problem with getting that information is that the way the results are explained isn't always factually correct. And so people will think a low AMH means that they're destined to be infertile. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, I'm not one of those fertility doctors that wants to throw colleagues under the bus, but I've had patients come to me and say, the doctor I saw said I need to freeze eggs immediately because like I'm going to definitely have problems one day. And the truth of the matter is that your egg count does not determine your fertility. As long as you're able to ovulate, you're only ovulating one egg at a time. So a 35-year-old with a very low AMH who has a regular cycle has the same chance of getting pregnant as the 35-year-old with a higher AMH, at least on paper, because we have no way of really directly testing egg quality and we go
Right.
based off of
Mhm.
age, right? So that's a huge source of anxiety. And people
Mm.
blame themselves. They
Mhm.
feel like their body is broken. And it's like there's so many different reasons why you might have diminished ovarian reserve, especially at a younger age than expected. And that's another big miss is that a lot of times when people are told that they have diminished ovarian reserve in their 20s or early 30s, that's, definitely an outlier. And it's not to say that it's not relevant. And there could be things that are worth testing and looking into. So these are conversations that I have with my patients every single day. I think another huge misconception is that the sperm doesn't matter as much. It's kind of
Mm.
like, well, men are always making new sperm. So this is more of a female problem. Or, anytime an IVF cycle fails, it's probably just because of egg quality. And I think we're overlooking one half of the equation a lot of the time. And that needs to
Mhm.
change. Even when it comes
Mhm.
to what can both partners be doing to optimize their health and their odds of success.
Definitely. That was one of our questions. Where do the men fit in here? And where where do you see the men kind of not understanding enough? So that's such a good call out. I'm curious while you're talking about this. So in my own experience, I was going to every annual appointment, had an OBGYN. We did the, preconception workup, but we never talked about egg freezing or IVF, embryo banking at 35. And it's
Hmm.
so curious now where I'm at in our journey, like getting closer and closer to 40, 38. Um, wishing that I knew at the time, earlier in my 30s, like, that was such an opportunity then. I mean, we've now done many rounds of IVF, so we're okay there. But why is that not something our OBs are talking to us about? Why is that not a part
Mm.
of our standard healthcare? Why does it take going to an RE? By the time we get to you all, we're probably struggling. I mean, really good for that one patient of yours who froze their eggs and is now thinking about the the workup in advance. It's
Yeah.
amazing. It's like I
Yeah.
wish that I went to an RE or to you at the very very start. Like, where's
Yeah.
that disconnect happening? Why does that exist? And how do you see that needing to improve?
I think that's a fantastic question, by the way, because it's not talked about enough. And something that I do observe, and it's not across the board by any means, but I do see it a fair amount, is I think that general OBGYNs who are further removed from the technology of egg freezing and understanding what the outcomes look like today versus what the
Mm,
headlines say or versus what outcomes used to look like 10, 20 years ago is, I think there's often misconceptions about how successful egg freezing is. I think egg freezing gets a bad rap. A lot of people don't look at it in the context of human reproduction is inefficient, right? And so I've seen in major publications headlines like egg freezing isn't as successful as it's being touted to be. And they'll
mm,
report like data from a study, a good study that looked at outcomes over the past decade and said, 70% live birth rate if you have at least 20 eggs frozen under 38. That's terrible. And it's like, actually, it
actually,
takes a lot of eggs to make a baby, whether you're ovulating and this is all happening in your body or whether you're doing this process in the lab. Not every egg is capable of fertilizing, turning into an embryo, and being a genetically normal, healthy embryo. And then from there,
hmm
not every embryo implants. And that is just a fact about human biology. And so if you're freezing eggs, that inefficiency doesn't magically go away. You're still operating within the confines of a very inefficient system. So people just lack the understanding and they think, oh, I'm doing this really labor intensive, expensive process. Therefore, I'm going to get the results because I'm putting the effort in.
hmm
But fertility is one of
hmm
those areas where that doesn't necessarily translate. And so I think a lot of people don't understand the success rates and why they are what they are. They assume it's like, oh, the technology is just not there yet. So like, don't even bother.
Mm,
There is
mm,
that misconception. But then also, I kind of hear paternalistic advice being given where people will
hmm
say, I'm 35 or I'm, 32 and my OBGYN said to me that, I'm in a relationship. So like I'll just find someone
hmm
or I'll find someone if they're not in a relationship and I'm going to settle down and get married. And it's just like kind of a weird thing to be like, well, you have your whole life ahead of you. Like you're not older yet. So just get pregnant and they're not really thinking
yeah.
strategically that if you wait till there's a problem, first of all, then you're not going to necessarily be egg freezing. You're going to probably be doing IVF. And we should be thinking about egg freezing as a way to give yourself a head start if and should you ever need IVF down the line. And patients have
hmm
this misconception too, where they're like, I don't think I'm actually going to freeze my eggs. I'm here to just check my numbers and if they look good and if there's a problem, then I'll freeze my eggs. And I'm like, but you're gonna get so much more out of it if you do it preemptively when you have a good egg count. Like, coming back
hmm
to me every year to check your AMH, and then when you see it drop, then rushing to freeze your
mm,
eggs, that's not a good
yeah,
strategy.
right.
Yeah, I mean, I went through that exact conversation with my first, fertility doctor where
Yeah.
I was, and I'm curious if you hear this a lot, where I was like, it's not against, but, like, really hesitant of doing
Yes.
IVF, like, "Oh, it's just I wanna try naturally. Can't I try
Yes.
naturally a little longer?" And then when we
Yeah.
got to IVF, it was like with ICSI, it was like, "Well, is that, like, what's the more
Yeah.
natural way to do," it just was
Yeah.
holding me back, and now, man, I have evolved a long way from from that girl who was very,
You're
didn't know
wiser.
enough. Yes. But
Yeah.
is that something you hear a lot of reason people are holding back? I was in the
Yeah.
office, we may have wasted
In all
months there.
aspects, in all aspects
Yeah.
of
Mm,
health. I saw a patient today who has high blood pressure and she's 39 and I was like, "We really need to get this under control. Like it's in your best interest. It's going to improve your overall chance of success. It will set you up for a healthier pregnancy." And I feel like she just keeps kind of kicking the can down the road. She's very resistant to the idea of taking
Mm.
medication for a real medical problem. She's like, but I've done lifestyle changes. And I'm like, I know, and it's clearly not working, you know? And I don't want to keep delaying things, but I also don't want to barrel ahead and not address these chronic medical conditions that could really be a setup for an unhealthy pregnancy. And I'm ready to get the show on the road. So, like, let's just get this done, you know? And I think people sometimes get in their own way. And there is this um, thinking pattern of like, well, if I start a medication, then I'm medicalized and I'm labeled,
Mm,
Mm.
or now I'm in
mm,
a pattern where I'm going to be on this for the rest of my life. And it's like, there's no rule book that if you start a medication, you have to take it for the rest of your life. I think there is all this like thought process around like, well, then I'm going to become dependent on it. And then my body won't be able to do what it's supposed to do without the medications.
mm,
I see that a lot about metformin too, when patients have insulin resistance and they have PCOS. And it's like, I think this medication could help you. It's like, but I want to do it naturally on my own. And I'm like, but you've been trying to
mm,
do that. And that's sometimes not enough. So I think that it's sometimes these limiting thoughts that we put into our own head. It's
mm.
labeling, it's feeling stigma,
Yep.
feeling shame, wanting to avoid feeling like you're in a certain bucket, and it's all just,
Mhm.
like, in your own head, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And as a fertility doctor, I have to exercise patience because I'm like you are now, right? Like, I see it all. I feel like
Yeah.
I know it all. Like, I'm like, I understand when a patient comes and sits down and starts talking to me, and I'm listening to their story, and I'm, like, watching it all unfold, I already strategically am like, this is the shortest path to point A to point B. And the answer is not always
Mhm.
IVF, by the way. Everyone always thinks
Yeah.
that that's what fertility doctors are thinking. No, sometimes I'm like, people are shocked. They're like, oh, I thought you were going to say I needed IVF. And I'm like, no, I feel like what we need to do is target your irregularity in your ovulation because everything else is normal. And if we target that, it might get you there, right? And you're young enough
Mm,
that even though you want to have two children, I think that it's reasonable that you have the timeline to do it without IVF. So it's like coming up with that strategic plan, like that starts formulating in my mind automatically. But
mhm.
my patient isn't always going to be there. And sometimes it's going to take them time to catch up. But again, not to sound like a broken record, it comes down to the education piece
Yep.
and the
Mhm.
support and the validation, right?
Mhm.
And just being patient and letting patients arrive at a place where they're comfortable, but they're going to get there faster if they have a true full understanding of the picture. And I think all too often people
Mhm.
don't get the thorough explanation that they need, and they don't have the basic education to sometimes even understand the explanation that's being given. It is a massive problem.
I'm curious, and I know Amy wants to ask about targeted messaging online, and I'm really excited to talk about that because I appreciate a lot of the, you're very forward and upfront about misinformation on social media, which I appreciate. I mean, it's good. It feels good to see the experts in the space
Yeah.
calling out the BS when they see it.
Yeah.
But before we get into that conversation, I am curious, how can patients tell between the difference of like personal anecdotes versus the real scientific data when trying to make informed decisions about where they invest their time and money when it comes to treatment? Because there are success stories that may
Mhm.
be outliers, but then
Yeah,
we also have the research and we have the data. And so
I
how can
know.
how can they kind of tell the difference there?
Well,
Yeah.
it's a huge challenge because it's human nature. It's human
Yeah.
nature to be, like, hooked to, personal stories, and
Mhm.
to be so invested, especially when we're, like, all following the same people and they're, like, publicly sharing their journey, and then
Mm.
they're like, "And this is what I did differently this time," you know? And it's very easy to get caught up in what I call magical thinking,
Mm,
because it's like, well, it's just, like, this really simplistic view of, like, you did this and then you got result A, you did this and you got result A, and then you switched this one thing and you got result B. It must be what you switched, right? And again, it comes down to, I think, really trusting and leaning on expert voices. Um, and I think it's really tough. I think it's really hard. I think anecdotes just can't be enough, because when someone says something like, I started this supplement and then my third IVF cycle worked, it's like totally discounting all of the other tweaks and changes that were made, right? That they're probably not even aware of or focused on, but they're focusing on like what they could control and what they feel like they were able to change with their own actions.
Mhm.
And I think you have to rely on the data, but the difficulty is average layperson doesn't really know the difference between a good study and a bad study. And that's why it's really important to have expert voices in places like social media and in writing books and on the media, because things aren't always what they seem. Anyone can publish a study, and you can find a study to back up your conclusion in either direction. Like this came up recently with there was an REI, who was talking about like no one should ever do medicated cycles. And I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, you can find articles that are going to say medicated cycles have lower success rates versus a cryo-natural cycle. I've experienced that, and I talked about this in a video I made on it recently. I've experienced that going to medical conferences. Like you can have two people side by side presenting conflicting conclusions
Mm.
about the same research question. And the problem is that not all data is good quality. And so
Mhm.
it's tough because I wanna always be evidence-based, but sometimes we have to do this in between thing because our patient's sitting in front of us with a problem, and I can't be like, "Come back in 5 years when there's randomized controlled trial
Right.
data." You
Yeah.
know, you have to be evidence informed, and so you're kind of like
Mm.
looking at the totality of the data that's available. You're looking at the type of studies, the quality of the studies. You're looking at how reproducible is this outcome? Is it being shown over and over and over again? And what is your clinical experience, right? Because sometimes you're not going to always have the data and you just kind of have to wing it in an educated way, and you're kind of like learning along the way, and you evolve as a doctor from taking all of that into consideration. But if you just lean on anecdotes, or you just lean on like here's this one cherry picked study, I mean the thing is that there's so much bias. Like the example about the medicated versus cryo natural, I'll just use that as a quick example.
Mhm.
Studies that
Mhm.
show one is better than the other, it's often because they typically favor one protocol for everyone, and then they reserve the other protocol for when people are failing or when there's difficult cases. And it's like automatically you're comparing apples and oranges, right? So
Mm.
you have to kinda, like, look at everything, take a step back and have full context. But I
Mm.
think it's about taking what you're reading and learning and what your concerns are to your doctor, and that's why the role of a fertility doctor is so much more than just saying, "I'm ordering these tests, and you're gonna do this treatment," because there is this huge gray area in our field,
Mhm.
Mhm.
right? I mean, like, we don't have a test for egg quality, like, talk about blind
Yeah.
spots. We're making a
Yeah.
lot of educated guesses, and you can't do that without the help of an expert, and it needs to be an expert that is willing to have a back and forth dialogue with you and really reason through decision making. And there are things, and you can't be too proud. Like sometimes patients bring
Mm.
ideas to me and I'm like, actually that does have merit, and it's not like it's not
Mm.
so black and white that there's only one way to do things. And I think that's
Mhm.
important to be
Mhm.
really honest about. And something about my book that you should know is, yeah, my name's Lucky. It's, a very interesting, unique name. And so it was a good play on my name. But it actually, the meaning of the title is so much deeper. And it's to be honest about admitting the fact that there are all these gray areas, and there are
Mm.
all these unexplained cases of people that have failed like 8 rounds of IVF and then they happen to ovulate between cycles and get pregnant. And I know those stories can be really annoying and triggering to people, but the fact is that it does happen, and then the experts are like, "Well, I don't know how to explain that." And there's more than one way to get there. There's always room for hope, and we can't be too proud as medical experts to admit that yes, science is great and it's going to get you very far a lot of the time, but there is a role of luck and things that we can't
Mm.
always take credit for.
Yeah. Yeah, and we know too, right? It takes a really long time to get things into the standard of care as well. So at which
Yes.
Mhm.
point is it like okay to think outside the box with enough information? How much is enough information?
Yeah.
And one
Well, I
thing
think the
Katie
key
and I
is
talk
do no harm. The key is to do no
Mm.
harm, right? So like there's a
yeah.
lot of outside the box things that I'm like, yeah, I don't think it's harmful, and if it could be helpful, Why not?
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
For
Mhm.
example, patients with thin linings. I had a patient recently that kept having fluid accumulate in her lining and no one could understand why. And it wasn't because of estrogen. She never even had a single procedure on her uterus. And it was
Mm.
so frustrating. And, Mucinex is one of those like myths that has been touted since the 1980s. Like, take Mucinex, it'll help you get
Yep.
pregnant. I actually did use Mucinex in her case because one of the theories we had was maybe thinning out the cervical mucus will allow for secretions to drain more readily because we don't know why is this fluid accumulating and we've done all the
Mhm.
tests. And you know what? I don't know if it was the Mucinex, but she did eventually get pregnant. And so that's an
Yeah.
example
Mm.
of you can't be too proud to add
Mm.
things in, especially if there's no harm and if it could help. And so it's all about kind of weighing the pros and cons.
Yeah, I've done the Mucinex trick.
Yeah.
Same.
A couple
Same.
times. Yeah, that's a good one. I wanna quickly also ask before we sort of pivot, it feels like the fertility messaging that we're being exposed to is happening in quite extremes right
Mhm.
now. On the one hand, you have, as we're younger, it's all fear of pregnancy, don't learn anything about your fertility or, the longevity of your fertility health, just don't get pregnant. And then
Yeah.
now you're also seeing a fear of birth control show up around the other
God.
corner,
Yeah.
which I want to hear from you about. And at the same time, so then you have all of that happening. And then at the same time, you have like doctors like you and others who are stepping into advocacy and
Mhm.
pushing other pathways to parenthood or supporting other pathways to parenthood. Those things are getting more expanded, but also being more criticized. And I'm curious, like, how do you make sense of where we are? It's like a push and pull. It's like we're making advancements and then we're just getting
Yeah.
a lot of,
Yeah.
doors slammed or try to be slammed in our faces. And,
Yeah.
and
And everybody becomes an expert. Everybody has an
Yeah.
yeah.
opinion.
Yeah.
Katie and I start a podcast. No.
Well, I was gonna say this doesn't apply to you guys, but I feel like a lot of people need their podcast microphones taken away from them. They need to
Totally.
jack up the
Yes.
Mhm.
prices. It needs there needs to be more barriers to starting a
Barrier to
podcast.
entry.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah.
this obviously does not apply to you guys, but I just think, especially like all of the longevity bros and like the wellness people and like the mansplain. There's a lot of
Mhm.
mansplaining about women's health that I like just rubs me the wrong
Yes.
way. But yeah, I think it's all by design. This attack on women's health, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it's just really obvious to me, and I think it's not so obvious to the average person. It's actually extremely insidious. But a big call out recently was this trend that emerged where all of these creators all of a sudden started posting the same phrasing. And that was actually kind of dumb of them because if they had varied it a little bit, it would have still, I think it would have not set off as many alarm bells, but it was like, isn't it a
Mhm.
funny coincidence how all of us were started on the pill in our teens and now all of us have
Mhm.
infertility and are doing IVF? Everyone had the exact same phrasing. So it was very obvious to me that some bad actor, and I don't know who, but I feel like it's like, some a political entity, most likely, I think, or a group, um, who has an agenda, an anti-IVF agenda, is
Mhm.
sending out like a memo. Maybe they're even paying certain creators, especially in the wellness space. And this has been proven that this has happened in the past. So why
Mhm.
wouldn't it be the case now? And is saying like, we want you to create content with this messaging. And it exploded. And there's like hundreds and hundreds of videos from different creators, all with that
Mhm.
messaging. Now,
Mhm.
maybe it's like it caught on and people were like, oh, I'm going to make my own video and say the same thing. But it just was like a really
Mm.
coordinated attack. And it works really well. I mean, I've seen a shift
Mhm.
in my practice. I see a lot of women in their 20s and 30s, especially to just kind of talk about their fertility, fill the knowledge gap, understand what's going on with their bodies. Maybe they're freezing eggs. And a lot of them nowadays are not on any form of birth control. And I always say,
Mm.
what are your cycles like? Are you on birth control? Oh, no, I went off of it like years ago or more recently. And I always ask why. And it's not that I'm someone that thinks everyone should be on it, but especially when they're in a relationship and sexually active, I'm like,
Mm.
how do you prevent an unplanned pregnancy? And they're like, oh, I just like hope for the best, or I time it around my cycle when I know I'm not fertile, or we use
Mm,
condoms, but sometimes we don't. And it's like, it's kind of crazy that I'm seeing a rise in that. I more
mm,
than ever before, and usually the reasons cited are, I just didn't want hormones in my body anymore, and I feel like my whole friend group is kind of like, let's get off of the pill and let's see what our bodies can do. And it's like they don't maybe realize it, but it's that messaging. It's like subliminal, not so subliminal messaging, actually. It's right in our face. But you
Yeah.
think you're just scrolling past it, but your brain already clocked it. And it's going
Yeah.
to
mhm,
sow seeds of doubt in the back of your mind. And it's accomplishing something. And that whole feeling that you had of like, I don't want to do IVF, like it's not natural. Like that's
mhm.
totally valid. But that came from somewhere. And
Well,
there's a
yeah.
lot of places that it could have come from. But I think that could be a potential source as well.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see that shift and it's becoming louder, while at the
Mm,
same time, people who are going through infertility are also becoming more open and louder, which
Yeah.
to me, for my personal journey, made me more comfortable. Oh, this is more normal. Like I'm not,
Yeah.
I'm not
mhm,
that unique. So it makes you feel more normal. And then the counterbalance is showing up
mm,
in places that feel a little too natural and a little too, also a little too
Yeah.
obvious.
And it's all about taking choices away from women, by the way.
Right.
Like, that's
Yeah.
what it
mhm,
is. And it's about certain groups feeling like not everyone should have access to options to build families. And it's really upsetting. Um, and I think that women are such a vulnerable population. Anyone who could be pregnant one day or wants to be pregnant, anyone who is pregnant, even postpartum, it's like you are in a different boat than someone that
mhm.
doesn't fit in those categories, because it's very easy to manipulate you with fear and anxiety and change your
Oh,
decision
yeah.
making.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're a very easy target there.
Yeah, because you want to do what's best for your future child. You want to feel like everything that you did was for the better
Mhm.
for your future family. And if someone tells you to take a supplement because it's going to lead to getting pregnant and getting to that baby or having a healthier child, like, or
Mhm.
it's just it's very manipulative, and it's targeted by design.
Well, again, thank you for speaking out on this. I wish more experts did, and it shouldn't be controversial, but I feel like we don't hear as often how dangerous this sort of rhetoric is and how there shouldn't be any tolerance for it, especially
Yeah.
online, of all places.
Yeah, well, I'll
Yeah.
add one thing to say. I also think OBGYNs, the field of women's health, didn't do us a lot of favors, because even though it might have been the right treatment, I do think that there was a time in medicine where that conversation and counseling just wasn't as extensive. It was very, the model of medicine 10,
Yeah.
20 years ago was paternalistic. It was like you go to the doctor tells you what's up, and you blindly accept it. Whereas now there's a lot more questioning. And it's
Mhm.
like the pendulum has swung in the opposite direction. But there's a lot of this. I was started on the pill at 13 because I never got periods, or my cycles were really irregular. It wasn't explained why.
Mhm.
And I think that's just how the culture of medicine used to be. And
Mhm.
nowadays, like if I'm starting someone on birth control, or I'm trying to manage heavy periods because of their fibroids, I'm explaining the mechanism, right? But I think a lot of people feel betrayed, and feel angry that this is the narrative that we're seeing online, that like the
Yeah.
solution is just slap the birth control pill on top of it. It's like a band-aid and no one's getting to the root cause. But it's like the truth is the birth control pill is valid medical management for PCOS. It's
Mhm.
valid medical management for heavy periods, for painful periods. It can address different problems, but it can come off, the optics look as if we are just telling everyone to go on the pill for any and all reason.
Yeah, I
Well,
think
and
yeah, go ahead.
we can transition away from this, but the last thing I want to add is because I think too, um, there is shock that comes with starting an IVF cycle and realizing that you're getting prescribed birth control as well, if that's your
Yeah.
protocol. Like I was put on birth control, and that was shocking for me because it was like,
Mm.
I don't have any issue with it, but I can imagine for somebody that might have a resistance to it or might be primed to be fearful of the pill, and
Yeah.
then to say like, actually, you're going to go on this to start
Yeah.
to start
Yeah.
your yeah. So
Exactly. And a
anyway,
lot of people
just
don't
a
realize that it can. it can freeze your cycle at day 2, day 3, which is the right time of the cycle to be
Mhm.
starting most different types of treatments, whether that be IUI, IVF, or a transfer.
Mhm.
And so, I don't think it's a mandatory thing. I always tell patients, listen, a lot of patients do choose to do this because they travel for work or, their period's not coming at opportune times, but it's certainly not
Mm.
something that we mandate. But it's an
Mhm.
option to know about.
Well, what would make that so much more of a open conversation is if we also checked in on our fertility in those earlier appointments when we're younger at our OBGYNs or our primary care doctors. And the conversation is basically just don't get pregnant. That's it.
Hmm.
Here's your birth
Yeah.
control. Don't get pregnant.
Yeah.
Um, so we are, also big fans of advocacy for our own education and our own ability to be empowered in these conversations. And we want to ask a couple of fun questions. But before we get into that, everyone should go pick up the lucky egg. I already have it bookmarked many different
Love,
places
love to see it.
where I was like, I have to come back to this. I have to come back to that. And it matches your headphones and it is your whole vibe. And your whole your brand is perfect.
Thank
So everyone
you.
should go check that out. But we have a couple fun questions just to wrap us up here because, we've got a couple minutes left. And Dr. Lucky, not only is your book so beautiful, but you always look so fab. And so,
It's
Thank
true.
you.
how do you make that happen? When you have early morning clinics, what do you do? What is your morning routine? What do you do to actually get out the day, but also get your outfit of the day? Like, what is your secret? Is this just have you always been this way? Is this something that's, how do you make it work?
That's so nice. Thank you. Honestly, I've just noted that I tend to have a better day if I like my outfit. It comes down to
Mm.
that. So I invest the time and energy in the morning to figure it out. And I wish I could tell you like some amazing hack. Like on Sunday, I lay out all 7 outfits for the week. Like that's not who I am. I wish I could be. I aspire to be that person. I would love to have like a little like a rail with like hangers of like my
Mhm.
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday up
Mm.
and have it all steamed and ready to go on Sunday night. But
Yeah.
that's not going to happen for me. It's just not.
Yeah.
Also, you never know what the weather's going to be. It's been a crazy winter here in New York. So usually like sometimes I have the presence of mind to think about it like as I'm falling asleep, especially if I've been having a
Mm.
lot of days lately where it's like I know I have an event after work or a dinner after work. So, and I'm starting monitoring in the morning where I'm doing all these scans at 7 a.m. So it's kind of this
Yeah.
crazy concept of like being like day to night ready and being able
Yeah.
to get dressed in a way that like is appropriate for not just morning scans, but going out for dinner. And so those are the days where try to dress particularly fabulous. Today was a day where I was like, I just did that yesterday and the day before. So I'm kind of tired. So I was like, I'm going with like a simple look. But it makes my day better. It makes me happy. I've just like always had a passion for fashion and I don't know. It just it lights something up in me, and I've started to share it more because like people have always been like DMing me like, do you have a link to your outfit? And it's like I've
Oh,
started to
Oh,
do it
cute.
yeah.
now. Yes, because
Yeah.
like
Fun.
I'm not a gatekeeper, and I've gotten inspiration from so many people online, and I get inspiration. You know where I get my biggest fashion inspiration? This is going to
Mm.
sound crazy during morning scans because all these women are coming in, they're on their way to
Yeah.
work, and I'm like, "Where did you get that dress?" Okay, now let's talk about your follicles. But I literally
Okay.
will like
Amazing.
go to my office and be like, "Okay, I need to buy this immediately, or I'm going to buy it later tonight." So
Wow.
I love working in New York. I feel like there's such great people watching in fashion here, and
Mhm.
it's just like a fun thing. It's like it's a creative outlet. Let's put it that way. So anyway,
So
I
Well,
don't
I
know if
feel
I
like
I'm
it's spur of the moment. I wake up and I'm like, how do I feel today? What am I doing today? And I try to make it special each time. And the days where it falls flat, I'm like, today's just not going to be as good of a day.
Oh, yeah. Well, Katie and I are laughing, I think, for the same reason.
I feel like
Yeah.
the LA scene needs to take notes
Yeah.
from the New York scene because our IVF clinics, it's all sweatsuits. It's like, what
Mhm.
is
Really?
oh, it's
Yeah.
all athleisure. I mean, some of it's elevated athleisure, but it's definitely not the place for fashion
That's
tips.
so
No, but
funny.
we did talk we had a whole chat about how, like, getting ourselves ready in the morning to even go to the monitoring appointment
Yeah.
changes your whole
Changes your
mental
mindset.
state.
Yep.
It changes your
Yeah.
mindset, and, like, you can kinda go seize the day, and I sent Katie a
Yes.
funny picture. I was like, "Look, I'm in jeans." She's like, "Who is she?"
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, you
right?
must have been
Yeah.
early in STEM because
Yes,
I
very
think
yeah.
dresses
Oh,
and tights are your friend.
Oh, yeah, this is pre-checkout.
Got it.
Um,
Got it.
okay, go ahead, Katie.
yeah, my last rapid fire question before we wrap up. I'm curious what your algorithm pushes you. Like what are the reels that you're sending your friends? And is it all medical or are you getting
Yeah.
like funny
It's a
reels
lot.
that you're sending?
I mean, I definitely get like a mix. I feel like Instagram's algorithm is really good at figuring you out. Like, so
Oh
Mm,
yeah.
too
it
good.
must think that I am going through fertility treatment. I must know I'm a doctor
Okay.
actually, but I'm getting fed fertility content like nonstop, which I don't mind because I like to keep my ear to the street. But I also, it's interspersed with a lot of like dancing reels. So I guess like I
Fun.
end up like staying on those more and like watching them over and over. Um, yeah, I there's this new girl crush that I have, and I just realized she's from Toronto, I think lives in Miami now. She's like some stylist or something, and her whole like she's created a new page and it's blowing up right now. But it's so fun because it's like all the music from like the early 2000s and she just does like
Oh
30
fun.
seconds of like a dance. And I'm like, this makes me happy. So I watch her reels every
Nice.
day. What else? Fashion content, but also just like funny humor, like millennial humor. I feel like that's really my rotation. What about you
Love
guys?
it.
Love it.
That's what's in your chat,
Oh,
your
same.
girl
Yeah,
chat, same.
ours is a mix of I feel like millennial humor, a lot of fertility content.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that we're often
Mine's
sending each other.
often sending each other. Yeah, we're skewing, I think, our own algorithms
Yeah,
with all
100%.
of that. Some cooking, I get some cooking stuff and gardening.
Mm,
That's totally like
I get
one
0.
day I will be a gardener, but
I
zero gardening. Our
yeah,
algorithms are not the same.
no. That's so funny.
Amazing. Well, this was super fun, Dr. Lucky. Thank you for spending the time with us and for your amazing book and all the work that you do. And everyone should go check this out and track you. Don't track you. Uh, what am I trying to say? Follow
Track your
you.
cycles.
Track your
Follow, yes,
Follow
cycles.
track
Dr.
your
Sekhon.
cycles.
Follow Dr. Sekhon. And yes, where else can people find you? Obviously, Call Your Doctor, which I love the name. Such a
Yeah, every
good
Monday
podcast
we
name.
get a new episode and we talk about not just fertility, but everything from puberty to menopause and everything in between. Um, and what
Awesome.
else? I have my website, theluckyegg.com. I have a lot of like cool interactive tools like calculators and things like that. So that's like a different um, vertical that I
Yeah.
think is unique from the book and what I do on Instagram. I'm on TikTok as well at Dr. Lucky Egg. Not as big on TikTok. I find the crowd there a little bit less friendly. So,
Mm,
I get out of the
mm,
comments and I just create. I don't scroll so much on
hmm
TikTok much. But I do worry sometimes that, you know how Facebook kind of became like the thing that your crazy aunt is on and like we all moved to Instagram. I wonder if like that migration will happen with TikTok, but I love Instagram. I feel like I've cultivated a really great community. I love seeing people talk to each other and help each other and encourage each other in the comment section, even if I'm not engaging in the comments because I'm like having a crazy day. At the end of the day, like you see people coming together, and I think that's the beauty of social media.
hmm Yeah, definitely. I think that your calculator is where I found you originally. Actually, now that I
Really?
think about it, now that you said it, I'm like, oh, I use
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, they're like
Awesome.
helpful little tools.
Yeah. Well, your blog is great. Well, thank you so much and have a great weekend.
Well, thank you for all your support and your kind words. And I really loved meeting you guys and chatting.
Loved
You
meeting you
too.
too. Thank you
Thank you so
again.
much.
Let's stay in touch.
That would be
Sounds
amazing.
good.
All right.
Bye.
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 Maybe if I stop looking, I'll find what I'm looking